West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I guess I'm more aware of the horrible things that go on in other parts of the world can still happen here. And yeah, you got to pay more attention to what's going on around you, even in this country.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I was kind of ignorant, and my parents didn't really tell me about 9/11 when it happened. I found out the next year when it happened. I was about 10. I didn't find out what it was until I was at least 11. It was a little bit shocking. As I was still a kid, I couldn't comprehend anything until at least, I think, about 13 or 14.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
It kind of changed our perspective of the U.S. also. Before September 11, I kind of felt like the U.S. was the superpower, not vulnerable, and me seeing that live on TV kind of made me rethink everything about the U.S.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I'm sorry, but I think that the country is actually more cynical. Maybe we've experienced 9/11, and we responded to that. And we responded in a way we thought made sense at the time, but it didn't. And so now we question everything, and I see our leaders not making progress, not making decisions, not moving forward on critical issues. I don't know if that's related to 9/11, but I do see really a lack of political leadership in our country.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I think that we, as a nation, came together the best that we could in difficult circumstances, considering nothing like that had really ever happened here. We'd seen, obviously, it happening in other countries, but you get very desensitized to that when it's not in your own country. So when it's here, it's very different.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
It definitely changed our country. It's one of those days where, for my generation, I'm in my mid-30s, it's something we'll never forget. It's like when my mom had JFK's assassination, she'll never forget that. But I think that as a country, it's changed us. I don't know, if we were very, in New York, you're very nicer to people right after it, but I think that's gone away. People are definitely more cautious about where they go and who they talk to and, what's happening. Like for me, I travel all the time for work, and you can definitely tell a difference on planes of how cautious people are and not discussing things with people because you just don't know.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
On September 11, I remember mostly the crumbling of buildings and the people who were caught and people who still went in despite all of that, and took a look at where my life was. And I had 2 kids at the time, and I actually quit my job 2 weeks later and decided to stay home as a mom, and then later open my own business. I realized life is too short, and we really need to seize each day.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
And my thoughts on what has transpired since that day has been as life-changing as that moment. We have changed forever who we are here in the United States of America and our place in the world. I still have questions of are we more safe today, or did they win? Did they win by terrorizing us and putting us in a place where we're fearful of everything? Did they change our way of thinking and behaving? I think that's still a question, and I think that that's what we have to ask ourselves.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I was in first grade, and I remember we were in a classroom with my teacher, and all of a sudden she just started crying, and she tried to explain to us what would happen, and none of us understood. But I just remember kids on our bus saying that they were going to get us next, and that was probably the scariest part and made me cry. And I didn't understand what had happened until a couple of years later when we learned about it in school. I mean, it's devastating for all the lives that were taken and everything that's happening now with terrorism. It's just hard to deal with.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I think September 11th made us all a little bit more grateful for what we have. And every day, walking to work right now, I live in a peaceful city. I'm walking down a peaceful street. I don't have to worry about being harmed on a daily basis. And those aren't freedoms that a lot of other people have every day in other countries. And September 11th made me realize that that's something that can really happen even in this country. So every day that's peaceful, every day that I'm safe, I'm grateful for.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
Everyone felt at that time that our country was secure. And then all of a sudden, there was these questions like, what's going to happen? What steps will be made? Everyone was just waiting for decisions. And it was just shocking. And then we all decided we were going to go home and see what the world was doing.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
Me personally, I wasn't old enough to understand the impact on 9/11 at the time, but I did see a lot of reactions around me, and those reactions were devastation. And I think as a country, we did take the right actions. And as I learned more about it, as I progressed in age, then I think our country did what was right, and we pushed forward like we should have. And I think it really changed the course of what this country thinks it needs to do for things that are happening in foreign policy, and I think we definitely grew as a country.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I was hired at Grand Valley, and I was in Ensemble Hall, and our dean, Jonathan White, was there. He set up a television. Students were funneling out of the classrooms. Everybody was standing around the television watching in horror. And it just so happened that my dean, Jonathan White, was an expert on Al-Qaeda. And 3 days later, he was in Washington, and I didn't see him for 5 years.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
I was very young. I was in kindergarten, so I was probably around 5, so I don't really remember it too well, but I just remember seeing my teachers in complete panic and just seeing everyone and my parents, everyone just crying, and just that night was so eerie. And to this day, I do think it's so important that we keep teaching the younger kids about what happened. And I grew up learning about this and hearing about this, so it has affected me in a pretty big way.
Connie and Curtis.
West Michiganders remember September 11th.
Okay, so my thoughts about the September 11 were, well, it's really bothering, I would say, to see such a huge and powerful country to be attacked. We don't know, I guess, terrorists. I think, coming from a perspective of someone not from here, I would say it would place fear, like it ignites, destroys peace.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
Overall, I really think that the incident as a whole just really brought the country together, and you can still see it to this day. Everybody's just so much closer, and for such a tragic event, it really did bring all of us, like I said, together. And I remember I was in middle school, and it happened in class, and it was such a tragedy. We didn't really know what happened at the beginning, and it really didn't take too long for all our parents to start calling us and bringing us home, and that's when we really started to kind of get a hint of what was going on. And just really sad, obviously, and still to think back to that day and how sad it really was. But again, it just really brought the country together, and I really think that's a really cool thing.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
I think 9/11 drastically changed the nation and how people think and react in these days and times. One has to go to an airport to find out that things have drastically changed. My heart still goes out to the families, all the families and the first responders.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
I definitely think 9/11 made us more cynical and skeptical as a country, because my mom and dad were actually supposed to be traveling home that day, and it was one of the most terrifying experiences I experienced as a young person, and just knowing that could happen again at any moment is definitely something that keeps you a little bit skeptical. But I also think it brought us together as a people. because I actually went to the 9/11 memorial too when I was in New York, and it was definitely one of the most moving experiences I had, and you could tell that everybody there was feeling the same way.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
Earlier this summer, I went to the 9/11 memorial in New York City, and the whole time I was there, it was completely silent. Broadcasted throughout the museum was people's voices and them talking about the remembrance of the event when it happened and the people that took place in the event. It was completely silent. You could still hear people from other rooms crying and other people talking about it. I don't think there was a word that was spoken, and it was just a serious time, and shows us how the country took it very seriously, and still 13 years later, it still made a big impact on our community.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
I was a senior in high school, and I remember walking down the hallway and hearing everyone freak out about a plane crashing into the building, and I thought they were all joking. I had no idea until I got into class and he turned on the news, and my teacher turned on the news right as the second plane hit. And I remember the rest of the day was just kind of a blur. We just sat around and did nothing, pretty much.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
I was down in Florida on vacation and visiting my father, and all of a sudden I was watching the Today Show, and one plane hit, and went over to my aunt's house just to visit, and the next plane hit, and pretty much spent that whole day just watching the events, not really knowing what was going on, and I don't think anyone really had the full impact until probably days later of what this was all about.
Connie and Curtis.
Michiganders remember September 11th.
I remember just getting to work and the TV was on at the end of the room, and this big explosion, so I went to look and see what was going on, and we're all like, our mouths are dropped open and we're going, what the heck is going on? And then, it wasn't very long before it became apparent what it was.
Connie and Curtis.